The distress signal from New Haven Colony came through at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning. Captain Doyen was drinking his morning coffee when the communications officer burst into his quarters. The message was brief and terrifying. The colony was under attack. They needed help. Please, someone help them. Doyen ordered his ship to jump to hyperspace immediately. The Indomitable was 3 days away from New Haven at maximum speed. He sent the distress call to the Galactic Council, just like protocol required. They would send help. They had to send help. That's what the Council was for. The first day passed with no response from the Council. Doyen sent another message. Still nothing. On the second day, he received a reply. The Council was reviewing the situation. They would make a decision soon. Doyen stared at the message in disbelief. Reviewing the situation. People were dying. By the third day, the distress signals from New Haven had stopped completely. Doyen felt sick to his stomach. He knew what that silence meant. Nothing good ever came from silence. When the Indomitable finally arrived at New Haven, Doyen ordered his crew to scan the planet. The settlement was there, but there were no life signs. None at all. 15,000 people lived on New Haven. Now the scanners showed zero. Lieutenant Hyogen led the landing party down to the surface. She had visited New Haven once before, 2 years ago. It had been a beautiful place then. Rolling fields of crops, small houses with gardens, children playing in the streets. The colonists had been farmers, teachers, engineers. Regular people trying to build a new life on a distant world. What Hyogen found now made her fall to her knees and vomit. Bodies everywhere. In the streets, in the houses, in the fields. Men, women, children. The elderly. Even the pets. Nothing had been spared. The Vracath soldiers had been thorough in their work. She found the colony's black box recorder in the administrative building. Her hands shook as she pulled it from the wreckage. This recorder would have captured everything. Every moment of what happened here. Part of her didn't want to know. But, she had to know. They all had to know. Back on the Indomitable, Doyen watched the recordings with his senior officers. The attack had lasted 3 days. 3 full days. The Vracath had landed with overwhelming force. The colony had no military defenses. They were civilians. They surrendered immediately. It didn't matter. The Vracath commander had ordered them all executed anyway. The recordings showed people begging for their lives. Parents trying to protect their children. The Vracath soldiers laughed. They actually laughed as they pulled the trigger. On the second day, some colonists had tried to hide in the underground storage facilities. The Vracath had found them. They sealed the doors and pumped in poison gas. The screams on the recording went on for almost an hour. On the third day, the last survivors tried to escape into the wilderness. The Vracath hunted them down one by one. They made a sport of it. The recordings showed Vracath soldiers placing bets on how long each human would run before they were caught. When the recordings ended, nobody in the room spoke. Doyen's second officer, a veteran of 20 years, was crying. Hyogen sat perfectly still, her face blank with shock. Doyen himself felt something cold settle into his chest. Something hard and angry and completely foreign to him. He composed a message to Admiral Miho, the commander of Earth's Third Fleet. He attached the recordings. He kept the message short. They killed everyone. Every single person. The council did nothing. They received the distress calls and did nothing. On Earth, in the capital city, President Jaiwan received Admiral Miho's report. She cancelled all her meetings for the day. She locked herself in her private office and watched the recordings from beginning to end. When her assistant knocked on the door 3 hours later, Jaiwan didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at the blank screen. Finally, she stood up. She called an emergency session of the Planetary Assembly. Every representative had to see this. Every single one of them. The assembly met that evening. The chamber was full. Representatives from every region of Earth, every major colony, every political faction. They all came. Jaiwan stood at the podium and said only one thing before starting the recording. I need you to watch this. All of it. Don't look away. For 3 hours, the assembly watched the massacre of New Haven. Some representatives left the room to be sick. Others wept openly. A few sat frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. When it was over, the chamber was completely silent. Representative Suho from the Pacific Union was the first to speak. His voice was quiet but steady. For 70 years, we've followed their rules. We've been peaceful. We've been diplomatic. We've been civilized. We joined the Galactic Council believing it would protect us. Believing that civilization meant safety. He paused, looking around the room. New Haven called for help for 3 days. The council debated. They reviewed. They followed their procedures. And, while they followed their procedures, 15,000 of our people were murdered. Another representative stood. Then, another. One by one, they spoke. The message was the same. The council had failed. The rules had failed. Civilization, as the council defined it, had failed. The vote came at midnight. The question was simple. Should Earth continue to follow Galactic Council rules and procedures? Or should Earth take a different path? Every single representative voted the same way. Not one dissenting vote. Not one abstention. For the first time in 70 years, Earth was unanimous about something. President Jaiwan addressed the planet that night. Her speech was broadcast to every human settlement in the galaxy. Today, we learned a terrible lesson. We learned that being civilized is not enough. We learned that following the rules is not enough. We learned that when it matters most, the Galactic Council will choose procedure over protection. She looked directly into the camera. New Haven trusted the Council to help them. That trust was betrayed. We will not make that mistake again. Earth is withdrawing from the Galactic Council effective immediately. We will no longer follow their rules. We will no longer accept their authority. From this moment forward, humanity writes its own rules. In orbit around Earth, Admiral Miho received his orders. He opened the secure vault in his office and pulled out a file that had been sealed for 60 years. The cover was marked with red letters. Total War Protocols. Use only when human survival is threatened. He began reading. The file contained technologies that had been locked away. Weapons that had been deemed too dangerous. Tactics that had been considered too ruthless. All of it had been set aside when humanity joined the Council and agreed to be civilized. Miho picked up his phone and started making calls. Shipyards received new orders. Factories retooled their production lines. Research facilities opened sealed laboratories. Across human space, something was waking up. Something that had been sleeping for 70 years. Humanity had spent those 70 years learning to be peaceful. Learning to be diplomatic. Learning to be civilized. They had been good students. They had followed every rule. But, before those 70 years, humanity had been something else. They had been warriors. Survivors. Predators who had clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain through sheer vicious determination. The Galactic Council was about to learn what humans had been before they learned to be civilized. And, they were going to learn it the hard way. The Galactic Council chambers were built to impress. The massive station called Concordia floated in neutral space, belonging to no single species. The main chamber had walls made of crystal that caught the light from nearby stars and scattered it into beautiful patterns. 73 different species sent representatives here to debate, negotiate, and maintain peace across the galaxy. Ambassador Jinwoo had been Earth's representative to the Council for 12 years. He was known as a patient man. A reasonable man. Someone who could find compromise even in the most difficult situations. The other ambassadors liked him. He brought them coffee, remembered their birthdays, always had a kind word. That man died at New Haven. When Jinwoo requested an emergency session, the council agreed quickly. They assumed he wanted to discuss reparations or perhaps a formal investigation into the attack. These things took time, of course. The council had procedures. Everything would be handled properly. The representatives filed into the chamber that morning expecting a routine session. The Vracath ambassador, Vecthor, arrived late as usual. He was a massive creature, nearly 3 meters tall, with thick armored skin and sharp claws. He settled into his seat with obvious boredom. Another human complaint. How tiresome. Counselor Esselin of the Lorani greeted Jinwoo warmly. The Lorani were telepaths, gentle beings who believed in peace above all else. Esselin had always admired the humans and their commitment to diplomacy. She sent Jinwoo a mental impression of sympathy. She knew about New Haven. It was tragic, truly. But these things happened in the galaxy. The important thing was to move forward peacefully. Jinwoo stood at the central podium. He carried nothing with him. No notes, no data pad, no prepared speech. He simply looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. Then, he activated the holographic display. The recording from New Haven began to play. For 47 minutes, the council watched. Some representatives looked away after the first few minutes. Others covered their sensory organs. A few left the chamber entirely. But, most stayed and watched because once it started, they couldn't look away from the horror of it. The Lorani counselor wept openly, her telepathic distress washing over the nearby representatives. The Thelian ambassador sat perfectly still, his military training keeping his face neutral even as his claws dug into the armrests of his chair. Even species that humanity had never gotten along with looked disturbed. When the recording ended, silence filled the chamber. No one seemed to know what to say. Jinwoo finally spoke. His voice was calm and quiet, which somehow made it more terrible. For 70 years, humanity has obeyed every council decree. We accepted your trade restrictions even when they hurt our economy. We accepted your territorial limits even when we needed room to grow. We accepted your cultural mandates even when they felt wrong to us. We did all of this because we believed in what the council represented. He paused, letting his words sink in. We believed that if we followed the rules, we would be protected. We believed that civilization meant safety. New Haven believed that too. Jinwoo pulled up another display. It showed the distress calls from New Haven, time-stamped and logged. These are the messages New Haven sent. 7 messages over 3 days. Each one begging for help. Each one received by this council. He pulled up another document. This is the council's response. Message received. Under review. Please stand by. That was sent after the first call for help. Nothing else was sent. The council debated. Followed procedures. And did absolutely nothing while 15,000 humans died. Counselor Esselin reached out telepathically, trying to soothe Jinwoo's anger. What she felt instead made her gasp and pull back in shock. There was no anger. Just cold, clear purpose. Like looking into the eyes of a predator that had already decided you were prey. Earth hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately, Jinwoo announced. We no longer recognize Council authority. We will not follow Council laws. We will not obey Council treaties. We are done being civilized by your definition. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Withdrawal. That was unprecedented. Species didn't just leave the Council. Where would they go? How would they survive without Council protection and trade agreements? Jinwoo continued speaking, his voice cutting through the noise. The Vracath Empire has demonstrated that civilian populations are acceptable targets. That helpless people can be murdered without consequence. That the Council will do nothing to stop such actions. Very well. Humanity accepts these new rules. Vector laughed. It was a sound like rocks grinding together. You think your weak species can threaten the Vracath Empire? We have conquered 40 worlds. We have fleets that darken the skies. Your little colonies exist only because we allow them to exist. Jin Wu turned to face the Vracath ambassador directly. For the first time, he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You've made a mistake. A very serious mistake. You think because we've been peaceful that we're weak. You think because we've been diplomatic that we can't fight. You think because we've been civilized that we don't know how to be anything else. He walked closer to Vector's seat. The other representatives watched, fascinated and horrified. Let me tell you about Earth, Ambassador. Before we joined this council, we spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. We had weapons that could burn continents. We had diseases that could wipe out entire populations. We got very, very good at murder. Jin Wu's smile disappeared. When we joined the council, we put all of that away. We chose to be better. We chose peace. We chose civilization. But, we never forgot how to be what we were. We just stopped practicing. He walked back to the podium. You killed 15,000 of our people. You laughed while you did it. And, the council did nothing. So now we're going to show you what humanity is really capable of when we stop being civilized. The threat hung in the air. Vector started to laugh again, but, something in Jin Wu's expression made him stop. Tell your emperor this, Jin Wu said quietly. We're coming. And, we're going to teach the Vracath Empire what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. With that, Ambassador Jin Wu left the chamber. Behind him, chaos erupted. Representatives shouted questions. Some demanded Earth be sanctioned for threatening a council member. Others called for emergency sessions to address the withdrawal. Councillor Esselin sat quietly, still reeling from what she had sensed in Jin Wu's mind. The other council members didn't understand yet. They thought this was just angry posturing. Political theater from a grieving species. But, she had touched Jin Wu's thoughts. She had felt what was coming. And, it terrified her. On Earth, Admiral Miho received confirmation that the withdrawal was complete. He opened his secure files and began issuing orders. The first went to the shipyards at Luna Station. Stop building cargo vessels. Start building warships. The second went to the research facility on Mars. Unseal Project Hellfire. The third went to every military base in human space. Activate all reserve personnel. This is not a drill. Across human-controlled territory, the machinery of war began to move. Factories that had built farming equipment started producing ammunition. Scientists who had been studying agriculture shifted to weapons development. Civilian ships were retrofitted with military hardware. The Galactic Council had spent 70 years believing that humanity was civilized. They had believed that humans were peaceful by nature. They had believed that Earth would always choose diplomacy over violence. They were about to learn the difference between being civilized and being harmless. Admiral Miho stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution and looked out at the growing fleet assembling around Earth. 300 ships now. There would be thousands soon. And every single one of them carried weapons that the Council had never seen before because they had been locked away for 70 years. Humanity had tried civilization. They had given it their best effort. For 70 years they had been model citizens of the galaxy. New Haven was their reward for that effort. Now it was time to remind the galaxy what Earth was like before they learned to play nice. Fleet Commander Veshkan of the Vracath Empire had fought in 43 battles over his long career. He had destroyed entire planets. He had seen species beg for mercy and shown them none. War was simple to him. You brought overwhelming force and crushed your enemy. The Vracath way had worked for 3,000 years. When the humans declared war, Veshkan actually felt amused. Humans had 12 colony worlds and, maybe 300 military ships. The Vracath could field 3,000 warships without even straining their resources. This would be quick and easy. His orders were simple. Take the human colony at New Prussia. Destroy any resistance. Occupy the planet. Show the humans what happens when weak species challenge the Vracath Empire. Veshkan brought 400 ships to New Prussia. More than enough. The colony had minimal defenses. He expected to be in orbit making victory reports within a week. When his fleet arrived at New Prussia, the first thing he noticed was the silence. No distress calls. No panic transmissions. No desperate pleas for mercy. Just silence. His sensors showed the colony settlements were empty. Every human had been evacuated. Strange. Where had they gone? No matter. He would find them eventually. Then, his weapons officer shouted a warning. Energy signatures all around them. Dozens of them. No, hundreds of them. The defense platforms appeared out of nowhere. They had been hidden, cloaked somehow. Captain Tajin commanded the platform designated Retribution 7. She had volunteered for this mission the day after watching the New Haven recordings. Her family had died there. Her parents, her brother, her nephew who was only 3 years old. When the Vracath fleet entered range, she gave the order. Fire everything. The platforms weren't armed with normal weapons. No plasma cannons or energy beams like the Council species used. Human engineers had spent 70 years studying how every species built their defenses. They knew exactly how Vracath shields worked. They knew the weaknesses. The kinetic impactors launched at incredible speed. Solid metal slugs accelerated to a fraction of light speed. The Vracath shields were designed to disperse energy. They had no idea what to do with solid matter moving that fast. 30 Vracath ships simply exploded in the first salvo. Their shields failed instantly. The impactors punched through armor, through hull, through everything. Ships that had survived dozens of battles were destroyed in seconds. Veshkan stared at his displays in shock. 30 ships gone. Just like that. What kind of weapons were these? He ordered his fleet to close the distance. Energy weapons got more effective at close range. His ships were larger, more powerful. They would crush these human platforms. The human ships moved to intercept. They were small compared to Vracath dreadnoughts. Maybe 1/10 the size. Veshkan felt his confidence return. Size mattered in space combat. Everyone knew that. Then, the first human ship rammed into one of his cruisers at full speed. Just before impact, the ship's reactor detonated. The explosion vaporized both vessels. Another human ship did the same thing. Then, another. Then, 5 more at once. They're insane, Veshkan's tactical officer said. They're committing suicide. But, it was working. Each kamikaze attack took out at least one Vracath ship. Sometimes 2 if they were close together. The human pilots were evacuating to escape pods seconds before impact, but, still. Who fights like this? Who throws away their ships? People who have nothing left to lose, that's who. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Veshkan had lost 200 ships. 200. The humans lost 73. But, those 73 had been volunteers. Every single pilot had signed up knowing they probably wouldn't survive. Veshkan retreated with what remained of his fleet. He sent an urgent message to the Emperor. The humans are not what we thought. We need reinforcements. But, the battle at New Prussia was just a distraction. While Veshkan fought, Commander Yuna led 20 stealth ships deep into Vracath territory. Her mission was classified at the highest level. Only Admiral Miho and President Wunchik knew the full details. Her target was Vracath Prime, the industrial heart of the Empire. The planet where they built their ships, manufactured their weapons, produced their armor and equipment. It was heavily defended. 500 warships in permanent orbit. Massive defense stations. Planetary shields. Yuna didn't plan to fight any of them. Her ship slipped past the defenses using technology the Council had banned 200 years ago. Cloaking systems that bent light and sensor waves. The treaty against such technology had been signed after a war where cloaked ships had slaughtered billions. Humanity had honored that treaty for 70 years. Not anymore. The 20 ships reached orbit undetected. Each one carried a single weapon. Something else that was banned. Something that the Lorani had begged the Council to prohibit after it was used to destroy their homeworld 300 years ago. The nanoplague was Dr. Yunji's creation. She had lost her daughter at New Haven. A little girl named Sora who was only 8 years old. Sora loved flowers and wanted to be a botanist when she grew up. The recordings showed her trying to hide behind her mother when the Vracath soldiers came. Dr. Yunji had poured all her grief and rage into this weapon. It was brilliant and terrible. The nano-machines were programmed to consume specific materials. Refined metals. Industrial plastics. Composite materials. Anything used in manufacturing. They did not harm organic life. Yunji could have made them consume flesh and bone. She could have killed every Vracath on the planet. But she chose not to. The plague would destroy their factories, their shipyards, their ability to make war. It would leave the people alive. We're not like them, she had said when presenting the weapon. We don't murder civilians. We just take away their ability to murder ours. The plague was released into Vracath Prime's atmosphere. The nano-machines spread quickly, carried by wind and rain. Within hours, they had infected every industrial center on the planet. The Vracath didn't even notice at first. The machines were microscopic. Invisible. They worked slowly, carefully, breaking down materials molecule by molecule. By the second day, factory equipment started failing. Metal supports weakened and collapsed. Shipyard cranes fell apart. Manufacturing plants stopped working. The Vracath engineers couldn't understand what was happening. Everything was just falling apart for no reason. By the third day, they understood. Every factory on Vracath Prime was gone. Reduced to dust and rust. The shipyards where they built their mighty fleet were piles of debris. The foundries where they forged their weapons were empty shells. The population was untouched. Not a single Vracath civilian died. But the Empire's ability to build new ships, manufacture new weapons, produce new equipment was destroyed. Completely and totally destroyed. Emperor Grathkor received the reports in his throne room. He read them 3 times before he believed what he was seeing. 73% of the Empire's industrial capacity. Gone. In 3 days. He called for his military advisors. How is this possible? Who are these humans? His oldest general, a veteran of 100 campaigns, spoke quietly. Majesty, we made a mistake. We thought humans were weak because they acted civilized. We thought their diplomacy meant they couldn't fight. We were wrong. The Emperor threw the reports across the room. They're using banned weapons. Forbidden technology. This violates every council treaty. Yes, Majesty, the general agreed. Just like we violated the treaty against attacking civilian populations when we destroyed New Haven. The humans are simply responding in kind. More reports came in. Human fleets were attacking across the Empire. They were using tactics no council species had seen in centuries. Weapons that had been locked away. Technologies that were supposed to be forbidden. Private Daysum led a boarding party onto a Vracath flagship. She had lost her entire family at New Haven. Every single person she loved had died there. When she planted the charges that would destroy the flagship's reactor, she whispered her mother's name. The Vracath crew tried to surrender. Daysum let them evacuate to escape pods. Then, she blew the ship anyway. Mercy for the crew, none for the ship. When council observers questioned human tactics, she was blunt. You taught us that being civilized means being vulnerable. We learned that lesson. We won't forget it. Across the war zone, the pattern repeated. Humans fought with a cold efficiency that terrified everyone who witnessed it. They showed mercy to surrendering crews but destroyed every ship, every base, every military installation without hesitation. They didn't celebrate victories. They didn't take pride in their kills. They just methodically dismantled the Vracath Empire piece by piece. Admiral Miho watched the progress reports and felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, no triumph. Just the grim determination to finish what had been started. The Vracath had unleashed something they didn't understand. They had killed civilians and expected humans to follow council rules in response. They didn't understand that humans had only been following those rules by choice. And that choice had ended at New Haven. Counselor Esselin had not slept in 5 days. As a Lorani telepath, she could feel the emotions radiating from across the galaxy. Fear. Pain. Desperation. The Vracath Empire was dying and its death screams echoed through the mental plane that her species inhabited. But, worse than the Vracath emotions were the human ones. Or rather, the lack of them. Where she expected rage, she found cold calculation. Where she expected hatred, she found grim purpose. The humans fought like machines, efficient and emotionless. It was more terrifying than any rage could have been. The emergency council session had been called by the Thelian Concordat, a military power that normally stayed neutral in conflicts. Ambassador Soren stood at the podium looking uncomfortable. He was a soldier himself, a veteran of many wars. What he had to report made him uneasy. In 3 months since Earth withdrew from the council, they have achieved the following, Soren began, reading from his data pad. Destroyed or captured 40% of the Vracath military fleet. Blockaded 17 colony worlds. Reduced the Empire's industrial capacity by 73%. Occupied 6 major Vracath systems. He paused and looked around the chamber. And, according to our intelligence, they have not yet deployed their full military capability. What we're seeing is apparently less than half of what they're capable of. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Half. This destruction was only half of human military power. How is this possible? Demanded the Kryloth representative. The Vracath have been a dominant military force for 3,000 years. How can humans be defeating them so easily? It's not easy, Soren corrected. The humans are taking casualties. They're losing ships and soldiers. But they don't care. They keep coming. And their weapons, their tactics, they're unlike anything the Vracath have faced. General Hajun of Earth had been invited to address the council. It was unusual for a non-member species to speak in the chamber, but these were unusual times. His image appeared via hologram, standing at attention in his crisp military uniform. You want to know our secret? Hajun asked without preamble. It's simple. We've been preparing for war longer than you've known us. When humanity first encountered the Galactic Council, we had just ended 100 years of global conflict. Wars that killed billions of our own people. He gestured to a display showing human history. Images of ancient battles, medieval sieges, industrial warfare, nuclear explosions. We've been fighting each other for our entire history. We got very good at it. We developed weapons that could sterilize continents. Technology that could crack planets open. We became the most efficient killers in our world. The council representatives watched the images in growing horror. When we joined the council, Hajun continued, we agreed to put all of that away. We became merchants and farmers and scientists. We followed every rule you gave us. We honored every treaty. We became civilized. Do you know why? He waited, but no one answered. Because we wanted to believe there was a better way. We wanted to prove to ourselves that we could be more than killers. For 70 years, we succeeded. We were proud of what we had become. His expression hardened. And, then, the Vracath murdered 15,000 of our people while the council watched and, did nothing. Counselor Esselin finally, spoke, her voice trembling. General, we made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. But, what you're doing now, the weapons you're using, the tactics you're employing, they violate every principle of civilized warfare. Civilized warfare, Hajun repeated, his tone bitter. Tell me, Counselor, what was civilized about New Haven? What was civilized about ignoring distress calls for 3 days while children were murdered? Esselin had no answer. Another counselor, representing a species humanity had never had problems with, spoke up. We understand your anger, General. But, you're using banned weapons. Technology that was outlawed for good reasons. The nanoplague, the kinetic impactors, the cloaking systems. These weapons have caused terrible suffering in the past. Yes, Hajun agreed. Just like killing civilians causes terrible suffering. The Vracath established the rules of this war when they attacked New Haven. We're simply playing by those rules. A young ensign named Dasim had become famous across the galaxy. She was the Marine who led the boarding action that captured the Vracath flagship. When interviewed by council observers, she had been direct. You taught us that being civilized means being vulnerable. That following the rules gets you killed. We won't make that mistake again. The war continued day after day. The Vracath tried new tactics, called in reinforcements, even attempted diplomatic outreach to other council species. Nothing worked. The humans kept coming. Emperor Grathkor finally attempted to negotiate. He sent a message directly to Earth, bypassing the council entirely. He offered reparations. Territory. Vracath technology. Even the heads of the commanders responsible for New Haven. Admiral Miho's response was broadcast across the galaxy. Negotiation requires trust. You destroyed that trust at New Haven. This war ends when the Vracath Empire no longer has the capacity to threaten any human life. Not one day before. The Council realized too late what they had created. For 70 years, humanity's most dangerous weapons have been locked away. Not because the Council forced them to, but because humans chose to lock them away. They had chosen peace. They had chosen to be civilized. The Council had taught them that in this galaxy, that choice was a luxury they couldn't afford. Esselin tried one more time. She sent a private message to President Wunchik, who had taken office after the war began. She begged Earth to show mercy. To remember their civilized values. To be better than their enemies. Wunchik's response was gentle but firm. Counselor, we remember our civilized values. That's why we evacuated New Prussia before the battle. That's why we let Vracath crews evacuate before destroying their ships. That's why the nanoplague didn't kill civilians. We're not monsters. We're not like them. He paused before continuing. But, we also remember New Haven. We remember listening to children scream while the council debated. We remember being civilized and cooperative and peaceful, and we remember where that got us. We won't forget either lesson. The truth was becoming clear to everyone. Humanity wasn't fighting out of rage or revenge, though those emotions were certainly present. They were fighting out of cold calculation. They had learned that in this galaxy, you either had the strength to protect yourself or you died begging for help that never came. A human fleet admiral named Kyung Min led the final assault on the Vracath homeworld. Before the battle, she addressed her crews. We're not here to conquer. We're not here to destroy. We're here to ensure that the Vracath never have the power to do to anyone else what they did to New Haven. Stay focused. Stay professional. We're not them. The battle was fierce but short. The Vracath home defense fleet fought desperately, but they were outmatched. Human weapons were too advanced, human tactics too refined, human determination too absolute. When the Vracath fleet was destroyed, Kyungmin ordered her ships to hold position in orbit. No bombardment of the planet. No attacks on civilian centers. Just a blockade to prevent any escape. Emperor Grathkor stood in his palace and looked at the human ships filling his sky. He understood now. The humans weren't going to kill his people. They were going to do something worse. They were going to strip away the Empire's power and leave it helpless. Across the council, species that had stayed neutral began to worry. If humans could do this to the Vracath, what could they do to anyone who threatened them? The galaxy was learning a new truth. Humans had two faces. One was civilized, diplomatic, eager to cooperate. The other was ruthless, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. Which face you saw depended entirely on how you treated them. The council had seen the civilized face for 70 years. New Haven had revealed the other one. And now the whole galaxy was learning to fear it. Esselin sat in her quarters and wept. She had pushed for the council to welcome humanity 70 years ago. She had believed they would be a force for good in the galaxy. She had been right, in a way. But she had never imagined what would happen when that force for good was betrayed. The humans had tried the council's way. They had been patient, peaceful, civilized. And, when that failed, when their people died while the council watched, they had stopped being those things. The scariest part wasn't what humanity was doing. It was how easily they had made the transition. Like flipping a switch. One day they were diplomats. The next day they were the most effective military force the galaxy had seen in centuries. It made Esselin wonder what other species might be capable of if they ever stopped following the council's rules. The thought kept her awake at night. The war lasted 14 months from the first shot to the final surrender. When it ended, the Vracath Empire was a shadow of its former self. 3/4 of their military had been destroyed or captured. Their industrial worlds were under human occupation. Their conquered territories had been liberated. The mighty empire that had lasted 3,000 years had been broken in just over a year. Emperor Grathkor stood before a human military tribunal. The courtroom was simple, not designed to intimidate. Just basic furniture and recording equipment. But the 3 judges who sat before him represented something the Vracath Emperor had never faced before. Accountability. Judge Bora had been a colony administrator before the war. She had helped evacuate New Prussia before the battle, personally ensuring that every civilian got off planet safely. Now she looked at the Emperor with cold eyes and read the verdict. The Vracath Empire is guilty of crimes against sentient life. Specifically, the deliberate targeting and murder of civilian populations in violation of all recognized laws of warfare. She paused, letting the words sink in. However, humanity will not respond to genocide with genocide. We are not you. The Emperor looked confused. If they weren't going to execute him or destroy his species, what did they want? Bora continued. The Vracath Empire will be rebuilt, but under the following conditions. Your military will be reduced to defensive forces only. Your weapons technology will be seized and destroyed. Your shipyards will be converted to civilian use. Your educational system will be reformed to include mandatory courses on interspecies ethics and the laws of warfare. She leaned forward. A human peacekeeping force will remain in Vracath space for 1 generation, 25 years, to ensure compliance with these terms. Any violation will result in immediate military intervention. Do you understand? Grathkor understood. They were taking away everything that made the Vracath powerful. They were turning a warrior empire into something harmless. It was more humiliating than destruction would have been. But the Vracath survived. Their people lived. Their worlds remained intact. Humans could have burned everything and salted the earth. They chose not to. We're not monsters, Admiral Miho said when asked about the lenient terms. We just made sure they can't become monsters again. But, while the Vracath problem was solved, humanity's relationship with the Galactic Council remained broken. Earth had not rejoined. They showed no signs of wanting to rejoin. Instead, they did something unexpected. They formed their own alliance. The Terran Coalition was announced 6 months after the war ended. President Wunschik explained the concept in a broadcast to the galaxy. The coalition is based on a simple principle. An attack on one is an attack on all. And response will be immediate and total. No debates. No procedures. No waiting for committees to decide if help is warranted. The first species to join was surprising. The Lorani, those gentle telepaths who had been council members for 500 years, withdrew and joined the coalition instead. Councillor Esselin explained their decision. The council failed New Haven. They failed because they valued procedure over protection. The coalition promises something better. Guaranteed mutual defense. Immediate response to threats. We believe this is what the galaxy needs. Over the next year, 12 more species joined the coalition. Some were small species who had always felt vulnerable. Others were military powers who respected what humanity had accomplished. All of them agreed to the core principle: attack one, you attack all. The Galactic Council watched this development with growing concern. They were losing members. Losing influence. Losing relevance. They sent ambassadors to Earth, begging humanity to reconsider. Councillor Esselin personally traveled to Earth to meet with President Wunschik. They met in a simple office, not a grand hall. Just two people talking. The council needs you, Esselin said. Your departure has created a power vacuum. Species are choosing sides. The unity we built over centuries is fragmenting. Wunschik listened patiently, then shook his head. The council had 70 years to prove that civilization could be protected through diplomacy and law. You failed that test. New Haven proved that when the moment comes, the council chooses procedure over people. We made a mistake, Esselin insisted. You made a choice, Wunschik corrected her. And that choice taught us that real peace doesn't come from councils and committees. It comes from strength. From the certain knowledge that aggression will be met with overwhelming force. Esselin felt the truth in his mind. He wasn't angry anymore. Neither was most of humanity. They had moved past anger into cold understanding. They had learned how the galaxy really worked. Commander Kyung Min, who had led the final assault on the Vracath homeworld, wrote a book about the war. It became required reading in military academies across coalition space. One passage was particularly famous. The galaxy respects strength. For 70 years, we tried to earn respect through cooperation and diplomacy. It didn't work. Now they respect us because they know what we're capable of, and they know we'll never hesitate again. Is this sad? Yes. Is it wrong? Maybe. But it keeps our people alive. The Terran Coalition grew steadily. Its military academies taught a new doctrine. Never strike first. Always seek peace. But, if peace fails, respond with total commitment. No half measures. No hesitation. Overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Colony worlds in coalition space no longer feared raids or invasion. Pirates avoided them. Aggressive empires gave them wide berth. Word spread quickly. Touch a coalition world and you'll face the full might of the alliance. And humanity had proven they knew how to fight. 10 years after New Haven, Ambassador Jin Woo returned to the council chambers for the first time since his withdrawal speech. He came as an observer, invited to address a special session on interspecies security. The chamber was less full than it used to be. 13 species had left to join the coalition. Others were considering it. The council's authority was fading. Jin Woo stood at the podium where he had once announced Earth's withdrawal. He looked around at the assembled representatives, many of whom were new. The old guard had mostly retired or been replaced. You asked me to speak about how the galaxy has changed, he began. The answer is simple. The galaxy learned that humanity operates in two modes. Civilized and uncivilized. We strongly prefer the first. We're builders, explorers, traders, diplomats. We like peace. He paused. But, we never forget how to be the second. We never forget how to fight. We just choose not to, most of the time. A young counselor, too young to remember New Haven firsthand, spoke up. Are you threatening us, Ambassador? No, Jinwoo said calmly. I'm explaining reality. Every species here has a choice. You can join us in building a galaxy where civilian populations are protected. Where aggression is met with unified response. Where peace is maintained through deterrence, not debate. He gestured to the half-empty chamber. Or you can continue as you have. Following procedures. Debating endlessly. Hoping that predators will follow rules they've never respected. How's that working out for you? The chamber was silent. Jinwoo softened his tone slightly. We don't want to replace the council. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to make sure that what happened to New Haven never happens again. To anyone. If the council can guarantee that, we can work together. If not, we'll continue on our own path. He ended with words that would be quoted for the next century. We tried your way. We were civilized. Our reward was New Haven. We won't make that mistake again. The question now is, will you make yours? 50 years later, historians would mark the New Haven Massacre as the turning point in galactic civilization. The Council still existed, but it was no longer the dominant power. The Terran Coalition and its allies had created a new order. This new order was built on different principles. Not the hope that civilized behavior would be reciprocated, but the certainty that uncivilized behavior would be punished. Not faith in procedures and protocols, but trust in immediate, overwhelming response to threats. Was it better than what came before? That was debated endlessly. But, it was safer. Colony worlds slept peacefully. Pirates found easier targets. Aggressive empires learned caution. The predatory species that had once roamed freely found themselves facing consequences. Private Daysum, who had lost her family at New Haven, retired from the military after 20 years of service. She became a teacher, instructing young people about the importance of strength and vigilance. Her lessons always included one key point. We don't want war. We hate war. War took everything from many of us. But, we learned that sometimes the only way to prevent war is to be so strong, so clearly capable of winning, that no one dares start one. It's not fair. It's not ideal. But, it works. On Earth, a memorial was built for New Haven. 15,000 names carved in stone. People came from across human space to pay their respects. To remember. To ensure that the lessons learned would never be forgotten. President Wunchik attended the memorial's dedication ceremony. In his speech, he said something that captured humanity's new philosophy. We tried to be what the galaxy wanted. Peaceful. Cooperative. Civilized. And, we learned that in this galaxy, those qualities can get you killed if you don't have the strength to back them up. So now we're both. Civilized when possible, ruthless when necessary. We choose civilization. But, we never forget the alternative. The Vracath Empire, reduced and reformed, eventually became a productive member of the coalition. Their children learned about New Haven in school. About the terrible mistake their empire made. About the consequences of mistaking civility for weakness. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed it. Not through conquest or domination, but through a simple demonstration. They had shown what happens when you push a civilized species too far. When you kill their children and expect them to follow your rules. The lesson was learned. Remembered. Passed down through generations. Humanity had spent 10,000 years learning to be civilized. They had spent 70 years practicing it with other species. And, in 14 months, they had reminded everyone that civilization was a choice, not a limitation. The galaxy was safer because of that reminder. Peaceful species could build and grow without fear. Aggressive species learned caution. And humanity stood watch, ready to be diplomats and traitors and friends. But also ready to be something else if necessary. Always ready. Never forgetting. Never again would they wait for help that wouldn't come. They had learned to be civilized. They had also learned when to stop.